Hello, thank you for the welcome and thank you for having me on this prestigious event. I'll spend a little bit of time introducing myself so you know who I am and my background. I have spent 27 years in information technology in high tech, which was Intel. So I spent 15 years in Intel. And then I moved to oil and gas and spent another 12 years at BP. In Intel, I managed a lot of the automation and innovation around Intel's supply chain when it came to implementing custom-made technology or buying off-the-shelf capabilities to manage the complex state of Intel's supply chain. And then I actually moved into a role where I created a competitive intelligence benchmarking capability within Intel. And that was my move to BP. They actually hired me away to create the same type of capability at BP. So I spent a lot of years actually working on the front lines of the technology and the innovation and the creativity of designing solutions. Also then moved into senior level leadership roles in management and more of a strategic capacity. Through that, I was one of a few women that were actually in IT and actually one of a few women that made it to senior level leadership positions. And I got really involved in the diversity and inclusion programs within BP, as a matter of fact, championing them within our IT organization. I also created a couple of organizations for the work that I did in competitive intelligence. And obviously through my work, I traveled internationally and found myself in Saudi Arabia on many occasions in engagements with Aramco and Aramco's IT organization. And I also was one of the co-founders of GROW, Gulf Region Organization for Women. And so I'm very actively involved in moving the conversation forward and driving the agenda for more women in technology. And I'm going to talk about how we stimulate innovation and maximize business outcomes. And if I can actually get my slides to move, that would be better. There we go. So right now, companies and countries all around the world are talking about gender diversity and inclusion. And it's such an important topic, and it's especially an important topic in information technology. And I want to actually talk about why they're having this conversation. So everybody says diversity and inclusion because it's, improved economic and social impact, but there's so much more to it. If you actually want to stimulate innovation and maximize business outcomes and improve social standards, you're going to actually want to bring more women into this equation. And I spent all those years as a benchmarking and competitive intelligence leader. And so I like using data and facts and information to demonstrate and tell stories. So that's what we're going to do. We're going to walk through some information about why women actually create more profitability and bring more business value to outcomes, and why they're so important in the world of information technology when we need to actually tackle the world business and social challenges of the future. So if I keep moving, I do want to start with a quote. I want to start with a quote, and I'm going to actually read it. And this quote comes from Ban Ki-moon, and he was the former UN secretary for the United Nations. And I'm just going to read it verbatim. And it says, countries with more gender equality have better economic growth. Companies with more women leaders perform better. Peace agreements that include women are more durable. And parliaments with more women enact more legislation on key social issues such as health, education, anti-discrimination, and child support. And from his point of view, the evidence is clear, and from the point of view of many companies and countries, equality for women means progress for all. And so I'm going to spend just a moment and talk about the economic impact, because everybody's talking about this, right? What is the economic impact of bringing women into the workforce? And when they think about economic impact, they think about you know, the more women work, the more money they have, the more money they spend, the more money they contribute to the economy. And when you put this into terms, McKinsey actually did a study and they said, what if we could reach gender equality by 2025? Now that's even more aggressive than Vision 2030, right? So they just did a study, what would happen if we could do that? And if across the world we could reach gender equality, we would contribute $28 trillion into the GDP of the world. That's equivalent to the US and China economies. But that's not realistic. That's not going to happen. As a matter of fact, we're all struggling just to get to the 2030 vision because these are big goals. So then they looked again and they said, well, what if we could actually, for every region, for the country that was the furthest along on the journey of gender equality, if we could move the other countries to that level, what would that do to the GDP? And that would actually introduce $12 trillion into the world economy, just by raising to the highest level within a region. So the conversation around economic stimulus that women will bring by coming into the workforce is based around these numbers. But I want to change the conversation because it's not just about women contributing and spending money. I want to talk about what is the real value that they have when they come into the workplace. And especially from someone who worked in information technology and led major programs and major teams across the world and had an opportunity to work in a diverse environment. So I'm going to share a few other data points. And one is a data point that was done by McKinsey as well. And this one actually looked at companies that had more women in executive teams and what happened to the performance of those companies. And what they found is that diversity added profitability and value creation for those companies. As a matter of fact, for the teams that had more gender diversity, for the companies, I should say, that had more gender diversity, they were actually 21% more likely to be more profitable than the teams that didn't. And a more telling statistic is the companies that had lower gender diversity were actually 27% less likely to have higher profitability. So the conclusion was, at the executive level, at the senior level leadership positions, having women in those positions actually benefited the companies from a profitability and a value creation perspective. So the outcome of this study was women are good for business. But let's take it to the next level. And now what I want to talk about is team performance. How do women contribute to supporting team productivity and innovation? And there were two studies that were done. One was done by MIT and the other one was done by Google. And this is what they found. So the MIT study actually looked at 700 participants and it created scenarios of teams, and it put teams together that were teams that had higher IQ versus lower IQ. And those teams with the higher IQ did not outperform the teams with lower IQ. They put teams together with extroverts versus introverts. And the teams with more extroverts did not outperform the teams with more introverts. They found three primary characteristics that led to team performance. And just so you know, they actually did the study twice. They did it in 2010, and then they recreated it and did it again in 2015 and came back with the same conclusions. The three things that they found that stimulated team performance was, first of all, inclusion. The teams that contributed more equally to the team's discussions and everyone contributed, which is the definition of inclusion, where actually it was a key factor in performance. The second one was emotional intelligence. The teams that actually could read the complex emotional states from their stakeholders, from their other team members, from their internal management structure to their customers and partners, those were the teams that actually had a competitive edge because of their emotional intelligence. And the third factor is actually the teams with more women outperform the teams with more men. Now, I'm not talking about the teams that had all women outperform teams that had all men, because that absolutely was not the case. but the teams that actually had a little bit higher than a 50-50 split with the women actually were the teams that were the high performing. So inclusion, emotional intelligence, and diversity were what actually led to high performing teams. Now, a couple years back, Google did a study, and they spent actually 2 years looking at what made high performing teams in their environments as well. And they came out with 5 factors, but the last one, which is psychologically safety, that was by far the most important as far as team performance. And that factor looked at a lot of the things that the MIT study found is being able to contribute equally, having emotional intelligence, being good listeners, creating a safe zone, and having diversity within the mix of your teams. And what both of these studies concluded was women and feminine leadership traits enhance team performance to generate better outcomes. So diversity, as far as gender equality, is not just a nice thing to do. It's not just a thing to do to actually increase your economic performance within your company or within your country. It's actually imperative for business outcomes. It's imperative to improve team performance, imperative to add profitability, and it's imperative to actually create an inclusive work environment where everyone thrives, not just women, but everyone thrives. So now I'm actually going to talk a little bit about the difference between feminine and masculine leadership traits. Now, this is, when I say feminine and masculine, I'm not necessarily talking about women versus men, because some women can have masculine traits and some men can have feminine traits. But it's more typically aligned that feminine traits are more characteristics of women and masculine traits are more characteristics of men, but it is typical, and obviously there's a range and a spectrum of how we show up and what our work styles are. But what this study looked at, and this is done by Forbes and some other research around feminine leadership secrets was the study, and what they looked at is what are the key leadership traits that you need to have to actually be effective as a leader. And if you look to the left, you'll see the most important traits, and then as you move to the right, the less important traits. And you can see kind of how they're judged. But you know, we're looking at how do you empower others, the confidence in your communication style, good listeners. And what they found is through this variety of traits that you need to be an effective leader, some are more characteristics of women and others are more characteristics of men. So when we think about women, the ability to empower others, a good listener, high standards of ethics and integrity, work ethics. When we look at men's traits, they are masculine traits. They tend to be a very confident communication style, result decision-making, personal discipline, and conviction of beliefs. But what the study found is it wasn't one style or the other that provided the impact. It was the combination of bringing both into that leadership perspective and into how we lead teams, how we lead initiatives, how we lead transformations, how we lead to, you know, generate the outcomes we need to solve the problems of the future, is really based on the combination of both these feminine and masculine leadership styles. So the other thing I want to talk about, and I'm moving through this pretty quickly and then we'll open up for questions, is workplace behavioral traits. It's really important to understand that women and men will show up differently in the workplace. And again, these masculine and feminine behavioral traits is a spectrum. And so women tend to be more on the right, where men tend to be more on the left. But you can be anywhere in the spectrum, right? So as a woman, you can actually show up with more masculine behavioral traits or vice versa. But these are typically aligned. And so what I want to do is kind of walk through each of these so that we understand that the work styles between these masculine and feminine behavioral traits are different and that we don't see each other in our own image. And we understand that these differences are there and they're important to recognize so we can address the biases we might bring. And it's very important to understand the value each of these traits brings in their own right. So we're going to start with risk-taking. And men tend to be more risk takers and women tend to be more risk aware. And there's a story that's now told quite widely that puts us into really clear perspective. But many of you will remember the financial crisis that happened in 2008, where the banks collapsed and caused a ripple effect across the world. And it took us, almost a decade to come out of that financial crisis. The first bank to fall was Lehman Brothers. And in hindsight, looking back, they say if the bank was Lehman's sisters, it wouldn't have fallen. Women would not have made the decisions that took those types of risks that created a house of cards for those companies to fall apart. And so the answer to the outcome we needed was we needed to have women also at the seats of the tables that were making those high-risk decisions to give a balance from risk-taking to risk concern or risk awareness. And so it's not all women at the table and it's not all men at the table, but it's a combination of both bringing those 2 points of views so we end up with the better outcome that actually gives us the balance we need. Men tend to, or masculine behaviors tend to be more achievement driven, where women tend to be more purpose driven. And I think that one actually speaks for itself. Women are, and that also speaks to the fact that when you look at social improvements within society, women are the biggest drivers in those areas because of that purpose-driven part that we bring to bear. And there's a lot of great men that are also very purposeful, and they also do for others and do for society. That's, and those are role model men that we actually need to actually support and showcase. But it's also, when you look at the data and the numbers behind it, the majority of those social initiatives will be supported by and driven by women. When we think about confidence, men get their confidence much earlier in life than women. Now, some women are born confident. I certainly wasn't one of those women that was born confident. I had to grow into my confidence. And so the message here is when you're looking at younger talent, because a lot of the time when you start looking at talent in the pipeline of who's coming up, who is the movers and shakers, you look in that age group of in the 20s and that early talent that comes in. And men will show up quite quickly in that age group, where women actually might show up a little bit later. You need to give them a little bit of time to actually, build their confidence into these new work environments that they haven't been into, engage in a way that they haven't. And so women, you don't want to overlook women in their later years in their career, especially because women have, the years of motherhood, and when they come through those years, they actually come through in a really powerful place. So they're saying don't overlook women in their middle ages as far as the talent pipeline, because if you do, you're going to overlook some amazing talent. Men or masculine behaviors tend more to have career goals, and women have career paths. A good story to describe this is when I am asking one of my male employees what is their career aspirations over the next 6 years, they will tell me they want to be a vice president, they want to be a director, they want to be leading these initiatives, or they might want to be the CIO. But their career goals will be very, very lofty, considering we're talking about a 6-year window. Where if I asked a woman the exact same question, she's going to think and she's going to say, well, let's see, right now maybe I'm a business analyst. In 3 years, I can become a project manager. In another 3 years, I can become a program manager. So in 6 years, my career aspiration would be to be a program manager. And so as a woman manager, because I would think in a career path mind, I would think the man's aspirations were out of touch with the reality of the learning that needed to happen for him to achieve those things. But if it was a male manager having the same conversation, he would actually think in his mind, that woman's not very ambitious. She doesn't have aspirations to have this great, huge career. And so it's really important that we understand how women and men will differ in these conversations, so we understand we don't bring our biases to judge people on how they show up in their career path versus career goal. The other area that's really important to know the differences is how we network between masculine versus feminine behaviors. As men are much more strategic networkers. They're better at networking. They network to create the relationships they need to advance their careers. They network in a way that they support each other across the aisles, where with women, we're much more relational networks. It's about our friends, the relationships we have. We actually don't look outside those networks to say, how can we be more thoughtful in the relationships we build for the doors that we need help opening for our careers? And this is an area where women need to think differently and learn from how men network, and actually adjust their networking styles to go outside those relational safe places, and also how they support other women as well. The other thing that's very different in the styles is men, it's much more easy for men to be self-promoting, where women are more reflective on self-development. Some women have a harder time introducing themselves and stating their accomplishments and what they've done. They'll be much more humble in the way they talk about themselves, or they talk about their accomplishments. And so this is another area where women need to learn from men, because men do this much better than we do. And then the last area is how we seek sponsorship, right? So everybody knows, or everybody should know, there's a difference between mentoring and sponsorship. Mentoring is where you ask someone to really mentor you and help you with, developing yourself, helping you think differently, having different perspectives. So mentorship is really about that support. But sponsorship is looking for those people that are in senior positions and can help you advance your career. And men do this much better as well. Men will look to, who are those people that I need to have those relationships with? And when they have those relationships, it's easier for them to ask for that career support. Can you help me get to this level? Can you help me make this connection? Can you help me advance here? Where women will actually then use those sponsorship relations to say, what can I do better? How do I improve? And so that's another thing too, is as sponsors, if you're a male sponsor of women versus men, you need to know that this is just a different style. And as sponsors, even though women are asking for development, they're still ready for that support. So those are some of many different characteristic traits, but it's important that we start to raise awareness between these differences, so we don't see people in our own image, and we add a space for diversity and inclusion based on these different work styles. Because when we do that, that's actually when we get to have the productivity from the teams, the innovation that both genders bring, and the business outcomes that women help enable. And on my closing slide, what we have come upon is the golden age of women leadership. And this is happening all around the world. Companies and countries are talking about gender equality, they're talking about inclusion, but there's a reason they're doing this. It's about how to generate business outcomes. It's about stimulating innovation. It's about improving productivity. And if we're going to tackle the global technical, business, and social challenges of the future, we need all the talent at the table, and we need to give them a space to thrive and contribute. And so my takeaway is stimulating innovation and improving business outcomes equals diversity and inclusion. So I'm going to pause there, and I'm going to open up for questions.
Thank you very much, Nancy, for the professional presentation. We learned a lot from the content, and it's really very impressive to understand that it is not a competition between men and women, rather than integration between both. And it's continuity and support from both sides, men and women at the same time. My question to you, do you think that it is important for companies or organizations to apply such a test to understand more about behavioral intelligence that requires growth and productivity within the team who are going to compose the progress of for the company or the community? Thank you.
Absolutely, absolutely. And I think this goes beyond just women and men. I think this also goes into skill sets. And I'm actually talking tomorrow in STEM versus STEAM, because it's not just do we need men and women with, you know, the technology background. We also need the diversity of thoughts, diversity of experiences, and diversity of skill sets. And creativity is a big part of this. How we think, how we show up. And when we have this broad-based diverse team that's inclusive, that's when you're going to get your biggest, you know, benefits. The other thing that I want to mention is in context to artificial intelligence is we have to be really careful that we don't build biases into artificial intelligence, right? And so having diverse teams, challenging every single bias that could actually be built into artificial intelligence is critical. It's not a nice to have, it is a must have. And so the team dynamics actually is going to affect the output of the product that we deliver. And so it's crucial that we actually do our due diligence up front in setting up these teams to be successful.
Fantastic. What would you advise for the percentage within a team between men and women?
I think that, you know, I would actually go 50-50, right? I mean, if you go 50-50, and that's kind of what the data, the MIT study proved, it's really that 50-50 balance. But even within that 50-50 balance, you're going to want variety within that, right? You might want different ethnicities, you might want, you know, international versus local. You might want actually art and design, because when you go into artificial intelligence and you start dealing with artificial, you know, augmented reality, all of this stuff, you need creativity, right? And so my background, actually, even though I spent 27 years in information technology, my interest into Intel was as an artist. They hired me to draw pictures. The next thing I started doing for them is designing software. And I actually designed a ton of software that ran Intel's supply chain coming from as an artist, right? And so we need a variety. We need the strong technical skills, the STEM skills. We also need diversity as far as thought and creativity. We need diversity in gender, because the dynamics of the team is so important. If we have everybody that looks the same, has the same educational background, and has the same view of the world, we're going to only solve a small problem. We need to actually, if we're going to solve the big problems, we need to have, you know, this global perspective sitting in and contributing to that team.
Thank you. Beautifully articulated. Thank you very much. Anybody would like to interact with the question?
And I can't see the chat, so if anybody's in the chat.
I would like to, it's really more of a comment than a question, that recently in Saudi Arabia, there has been a gender equality in the salaries, which we're very proud about. This is something recent. And then also in the human rights, if you will, society or whatever it is they call it, they actually chose 13 women to be part of the, in the board, which is actually exactly half of the board members. So they had equality also in the gender. So we're really very proud of that. I think, we're taking big steps. I know to the west, it seems like little steps, but knowing where we are and when the education started for the, females, which was, in 1960, I have always felt as a Saudi woman, even though I've lived most of my life abroad, that we have really taken leaps. But it's really difficult for people usually from outside to see this. And I'm happy with the changes that have been occurring recently under, the Crown Prince, who has involved a lot of the, younger population are with these skills. And for us as the older generation, it thrills us because we have always taken the, if you will, motto to be the role models for the new generation. But now the new generation is flying. And this is something we had missed, especially as females, not having a role models at that point. So I just wanted to comment on that because it really fits into what you are actually, what you gave so, elegantly and very articulate in everything you mentioned in your wonderful lecture.
Thank you. And Professor Salwa, I am so proud of Saudi as well. I mean, I just recently reposted that news that the law for equal pay has come out in Saudi on my LinkedIn account, stating that they just jumped leaps and bounds above the US. We can't even get that law enacted here. And there's so many other countries around the world that cannot. So I see the movements that's happening in Saudi, and it's the pace and the scale that's happening is really a role model for the world, right? Other countries need to advance their gender equality agenda, and they can look to Saudi Arabia as a way to do it. I mean, the 2030 vision, the 3 pillars that are out there are fundamentally underpinned by gender equality. And I've been working in Saudi for many years, since 2014, and I've seen the amazing movement as well. And I also know the great talent of Saudi Arabian women, and it's wonderful that that's now getting showcased across the world as well. So I too am proud of the advancements that Saudi Arabia has implemented. So thank you for sharing that. It's an important point. Any other questions? Everybody's pretty quiet. I guess the one cool thing I would ask is the men. So the journey for gender equality is not a women's issue, right? It's a society issue. And we cannot progress gender equality unless we have what I call amazing men working with us, right? We have to have those amazing men that stand up and become allies on this initiative and embrace and understand the value that we bring, even though we might bring it differently, to give us that space at the table, to give us that place at the table. And this is not just a Saudi issue. I spent 27 years in information technology and high tech and oil and gas. There was only 20% female, in those companies, in those roles. And when you moved into senior level leadership position, there was less. So this is a global situation, and it's a gender situation that's, the World Economic Forum predicts it's going to be another 100 years on average before we reach gender equality, and in some countries 200 years. And, my objective now is to move the dial on that, advance gender equality at a greater pace. And we can't do that without men supporting and helping us on this journey. So for every man that attended this call, first of all, thank you for being here. And secondly, I would like to hear from you what your thoughts are on this topic as well.
If I may, I just want to echo what you mentioned, Nancy. I know that when we were chosen for the first time in the Shura Council, being 20%, 30 females, and we had no idea what we were up against. And the men had been ahead of us, for many, many years. If it was not for the Saudi men who supported each and every one of us and directed us, we would not have succeeded in that sixth term, where the females were first asked to, to join. Not only did they help us, but they welcomed us. And I think a lot on the outside world always look at the men, the Saudi men, as being an obstacle. And I will tell you, it is not the Saudi men that have been obstacles to the woman's progression. Many a times it's actually the other woman that, because they don't want to get out of their comfort zone, being cared for and supported. So again, when I look at the Saudi men, I always say, had it not been for the Saudi men, I don't think us females would have progressed to that extent. In my workplace as a surgeon, all my mentors had to be men because we were the pioneers. And had it not been for the Saudi men, I don't think I would have reached the heights or the leadership that I have reached today.
Yeah, and I can relate to that as well. I can absolutely relate to that as well. There have been many men in my career that have supported me, helped me, and encouraged me. And so for those men, I am forever grateful. Yes. Yes. And women need to do a better job of supporting and helping each other as well. So that's also a big, important point that you're raising. Any other questions? So Fatima, if there's no other questions, should we, what do you recommend?
Yeah, I think there is no other question, and I would like to thank you for this professional presentation. And the AI Society is going to learn a lot from what you have presented today. And I'm sure it is going to be, once it is uploaded to the YouTube, everybody can join there and listen to the wonderful advices that you have given us all. Thank you again, and we look forward to meet you and see you participating with us in a different events. Thank you, Nancy.
Fantastic. Thank you all. It's great to be here, and I really appreciate the venue and the forum to have this important conversation.
God bless you. Thank you.
Thank you.